Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles Podcast, where I look to distill the best practices and best ideas of the world's most successful investors, families, and family offices. I hope to provide thought-provoking opinions and feature amazing thought leaders to our listeners of the podcast with an eye towards the future of successful families and their family offices. Today's session is titled Conducting Effective Family Meetings. And what did I say as I just wrapped up my open? The future of successful families and their family offices. I'll tell you one thing, if there's no communication and there's not effective meetings one-on-one and more structured for governance as a group, that will not happen. So today's session is really apropos to a very integral part of my open, as I call it. Our special guests today are Don Opatrny and Keith Michaelson. They're co-founders of the Lovins group. I am meeting Keith for the first time, and it's been wonderful. I had a chance to learn a little bit about him online. He's really, truly accomplished and a great thought leader in the community. And Don, I've known for many years. I believe, Don, it was Amy Renker Thomas, probably a good 5 or 6 years ago, who introduced us. I've really enjoyed Don's work. We've done a couple of early morning Greenwich breakfast meetings going back probably 3 or 4 years ago that Don had a chance to be an amazing presenter at. And those of you that more so are members that have access to our Successful Families video project from 2016, a series of about 6 videos. Don was one of our, I think it was 13 guests that we had one day that we did that shoot at the Tamarack Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. But gentlemen, Don and Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelo. It's great to be here.
Well, I mean, you guys are among the world leaders. It's so exciting to have you on. And that really is a true treat that I get to talk to people that are truly the leaders in their field. And hopefully for my listeners, my viewers, and even more applicably in a deeper dive for our members, provide a depth of context. And conducting effective family meetings, I mean, like I said a couple of minutes ago, that comes down to communication. And that's governance, how decisions are made. That's inclusiveness of all within the family, including the rising generation, but also the value that elders and their experience bring. So this kind of really helps to put it all together. And what makes it a little bit more unique and perhaps complicated is the world that we're living in. Because this is relatively evergreen, by the way, it's relatively early November of 2020. So we're still in the midst of COVID-19, which means perhaps and likely recommended, depending on the size of the family and other factors, the family meetings may be happening virtually via Zoom. And where are some advantages? Maybe easier for people to participate because more efficient and less travel. But where does it lack some of the context and emotions that in person? So we're going to learn all those things from, if I had to pick 2 people on this, we have them today. Now, what we're going to do today, and we do this more frequently because some topics lend itself better to it, it's going to be a presentation format, including a PowerPoint by Don and Keith. They are aware that some people will be listeners only, but you'll be able to grasp what they're saying and how it ties in. It's great to have the visuals, but even without it, it still is going to be incredibly beneficial. Then at the end, I'll probably have a question or 2, but they're very comprehensive. And our live audience today may as well. So on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it off to Keith Michaelson. And Keith, you'll take it from here. It's all yours.
Great. So I'm going to take a moment here to share the screen so we see the PowerPoint. And hopefully here it goes. And there it is.
Excellent. Well, Angelo, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I feel very moved by your mission of your podcast. I think it is so important for us to understand how families are succeeding today and to be able to share information about that more broadly. And Keith and I have the real good fortune of working with families all across the country as family business consultants, but also as licensed marriage and family therapists. We both actually have significant management experience in our career development, and then we became marriage and family therapists. And we focus on working with family business owners and family office executives, really with the central aim of governance and systemic planning that is focused on the well-being of the family. So it's really a pleasure to be able to share with you today. This topic is really something that we believe really matters. When enterprising families focus on creating effective family meetings, we've seen some remarkable things happen. And when they don't, we've also seen how dangerous family business can be. It's especially gratifying for us when business success and family thriving grow together. But we know that this doesn't just happen on its own. Doing the important and difficult work of creating effective family meetings is work that many families will do if they're supported appropriately. And it would be great to be able to see our guests and really interact with you more, in a live way like we're used to. But since we don't have that opportunity here to hear your stories and understand why this topic is so important to you, we want to begin by saying that we know we have something in common, and that is we've all been raised in a family. So we all know how powerful even the slightest interaction with family members can be. We've all experienced how much of our well-being depends on how we feel in the presence of other family members. So we take this topic very seriously, and we hope that you're going to learn something today that might inspire you to have a new kind of family conversation.
The session is about conducting effective family meetings, and we will be talking directly about that. But first, we're going to take a step back and talk about the unique challenges of thriving in the context of a family business, and particularly about the idea of belonging. We all know how families start. An intimate bond is created between two people, and a child is brought into that bond through birth or adoption. To feel safe and accepted within the family, each of us as a child has to figure out how to belong to both sides, to be loyal to our mother and to our father. So the first thing each of us does is to figure out how to belong. As we continue to mature, another need emerges, and we seek to differentiate and create our own separate identity. Part of the struggle to mature is to figure out how to continue to belong to your family while at the same time joining other groups. For example, peer groups at school, or religious, social, or recreational groups. Then at the next life stage, you may further differentiate when joining a spouse to create a new family, your own family. We have all felt the pushes and pulls of trying to belong to our family of origin and to various groups who request our loyalty. For example, as a teenager out with friends on the weekend, do you decide to stay out past curfew out of loyalty to them, or do you go home and remain loyal to your family? As an adult with children, do you continue to have holidays with your parents and your siblings, or do you start your own family holiday traditions? And as part of this struggle, along with feelings of joy and connectedness, you have to learn how to manage feelings of guilt or resentment. So everyone in every family seeks to belong. The interesting dilemma for a family in business together is that family business presents an even greater challenge to belonging for its members. And there are three factors we think that contribute to this. The first factor is role confusion. Because family members have overlapping and sometimes conflicting roles and conflicting group memberships, they can lose track of what role they're playing and therefore what group they're trying to belong to. Don and I were working with three brothers who had been in business together literally for decades. And whenever they sat down to discuss career development for their rising generation, the oldest brother immediately began to advocate for his two sons working in the business. When tempers flared, the brothers would set the topic aside and they just couldn't make progress. By making his role as father primary in these meetings, at the same time, the oldest brother undermined his role as a senior manager responsible to make good decisions for the business. The second factor is the complexity of decision making. In family business, a governance structure can be set up to answer the questions: who decides what, who does what, and who is accountable to whom. But even when these questions have been answered on paper, decision-making complexity creates relational stress. We worked with a business where the CEO was not an owner, but he was married to a woman who was in the ownership group. When the owners reviewed the CEO's performance or challenged an investment proposal he developed, his wife felt like she was betraying her husband in a way that actually threatened their relationship. It became unclear what group she belonged to and was representing. Was it her immediate family or the ownership group? Finally, the third factor is inheritance, whether by this we mean receiving financial benefits or the opportunity to have a position in the business. The sense of either obligation or entitlement that can come with inheritance can narrow the path towards growth and differentiation. We worked with one family where, at a time of personal crisis, a son had taken a job with his family's business that he was just not qualified for. And then he was given an inflated salary by his parents. His ongoing feelings of obligation to them as a son made it impossible to make the right choices for his own family as a father for many years. Again, there was the underlying question: which family did he belong to?
So with those complications in mind, we're going to turn our attention to really looking at family meetings in this complicated equation that Keith just talked about. In our experience, family meetings come in all shapes and sizes. They can be regularly scheduled time together in the office or at the home of a family member. They can be week-long destination retreats or large, extended annual weekend gatherings. They can be short, impromptu meetings called to address specific issues, or a series of meetings that are part of a long, ongoing initiative. We've seen effective family meetings in all of these settings. The main thing to us is that a family meeting is not simply a meeting attended by family members. The intention of the meeting matters. What makes it a family meeting is when the focus is directly on family life, not business strategy or on an investment deal or an annual update on valuation. Family meetings happen when the purpose is clearly to explore or to grow family well-being in some way. When business topics are addressed, because we're talking about family business systems, it's in connection with their impact on family life or family's impact on the business. Now, the compelling energy and the intensity of business topics often make those the priority. But if enterprising families don't take time to focus squarely on their family life and how they're doing with each other, then family concerns will contaminate every other meeting that they try to have, regardless of how successful their business or their family offices are. And I think that's really important for us to pay attention to, because many people believe that business success by itself is going to reduce family tension. And they often push harder into business success when there is family tension. But we're here to tell you that this is a myth. We've worked in far too many extremely successful businesses, some of the most successful in the world, that are connected with intensely dysfunctional families. So we no longer believe this idea to be true. So let's look at the next slide and how family meetings fit into the overall governance in family business systems. Our view is that family business systems are among the most complex human systems on earth. And this isn't an over-exaggeration. We believe this because they're the convergence of three different subsystems. And each of those subsystems have very different tasks and different membership rules that inherently ignite intense feelings. Family office professionals work in all of these subsystems and often experience the tension between their different functions. Now, we know this diagram is incomplete and a bit simplistic for some of the systems that you all might work in, but let's look at where family meetings fit in. First, I think it's important to see that every system has a boundary that defines us inside and them outside. This is every human system on Earth. And every division of a group into us and them, subtly or overtly, actually activates some primitive survival concerns. And because we experience our belonging needs very intensely in our families, there's often a confusion about the rights to belong in other parts of a family business system in the various forms of governance. In family business systems, the family, the business, and the ownership groups, and then the family office that is there to serve sometimes all of those, have different rules of behavior, different traditions, different membership rituals, and often even different ideas of what makes for a good outcome. And then the interesting thing is that in some of these groups, outsiders, people who don't belong to the family, sometimes matter more than family members do. And this is a challenge that kind of gets people quite emotionally and very intensely. For family life to go well, after the intimate bond that Keith was talking about has been made, everyone needs to contribute to creating a feeling that all family members truly belong, no matter what. Even the ones that marry in or the ones that we don't like very much. This actually is something that we call a healthy entitlement. You know, people in these systems are always kind of worried about entitlement, but that, you know, having a true belonging in your family is actually a healthy entitlement. But in other parts of the family business system, rules of belonging need to be conditional for things to work well and for those parts of the system to accomplish their tasks. Managing the process of balancing the different tasks, the competing needs, and the diverse priorities of all of these three groups is essential. And whether that's done formally or informally, I mean, we've seen families succeed in business, you know, both formally and informally. Every successful family business system does this, has a way of balancing the competing needs. Family office professionals are often charged with some of that balancing act, and they touch on all three of these tasks, sometimes in a single day or even a single hour. So we use the three-circle model primarily to help families to better understand and to separate out the different tasks of the three groups in their system. Families need to understand and to develop the capacities needed for success in each group, and to be clear about the membership rules for each structure, each group and each structure. Our experience is that when there's space to fully engage and explore the realities of family life, then all other aspects of governance go smoothly. And when there isn't, all of the others have tension in them because of what's not being addressed in the family circle. We know that at times creating family meetings is avoided because family life is just often filled with resentments, wounds from the past, and all kinds of expectations that are not talked about directly. And avoiding can become like a snowball rolling downhill. And the more you avoid family meetings, sometimes the more you need them. And then the more you need them, the more you avoid them. Keith and I actually think that it might be a family business fact. We're not entirely sure, but we think it might be a fact that any overly intense reaction to a business or ownership decision is actually a symptom of something that's not being addressed in the family circle. So organizing family meetings with good agendas takes time and takes effort. But we think it's an investment that pays huge dividends and time saved in the long run for all other parts of the system.
Okay, so another important point here around the same issue is that when founders particularly are still managing their business, or when siblings have been in business together for a long time, like the group that I mentioned previously, they often don't stop to consider what task they're working on, and therefore what they're actually trying to accomplish together at a given time. The three circles get ground up together, and you end up with what we started to look at as a governance meatball. You can't see the three, you just see the one. And then the question becomes, is each person aligned in trying to make decisions as owners, as managers, as family members? Do they all know what roles they're playing? Or do they have implicit conflicting agendas, that causes the stress? And also, because the three circles overlap and influence each other, any decisions made in one circle affect outcomes in the other circle. So imagine, as you see there, someone proudly showing you that all the squares on one side of a Rubik's Cube are green before you point out that the other five sides are still kind of a confused mess. They didn't quite get it. They only focused on one side. Good governance requires both clear boundaries, clear roles, and openness to what is happening outside of those boundaries in a way that is like working on the whole Rubik's Cube.
So we mentioned these three different tasks, and focusing on what is the task of family is what we're going to take up now. Now, Angelo, some of the folks in the Family Office Association were present when we took up this question in another topic, when we were talking about, how to talk about wealth. And so this might be review for some of you, but I think the more we review this, the better. I feel like I've really benefited from thinking about this over and over again. Well, you see here a hat collection, and I think that sometimes success in a family business is as much about managing one's hat collection as it is about managing a business. I once did an exercise with a family to identify the distinct roles in the system played by the third-gen CEO. He was CEO of a very well-known and successful business operating all over the world. And we found 14 different hats that he wore at different times, just in the family circle alone. That had nothing to do with all of his business hats. He was a husband to one of the owners, a father to future beneficiaries, son-in-law to a patriarch and chairman of the board. He was a brother-in-law to 4 other owners besides his wife. He was an uncle to a group of soon-to-be members of the ownership circle. He was a brother to a group of siblings who had nothing to do with the business. He was a son to retired parents of modest means, and we could go on. But he when you looked at his hat collection, it was clear that he had a very complicated Rubik's Cube. All of the roles that I just mentioned existed for him in the family circle. When he's wearing these family hats and focusing on this color of the Rubik's Cube, meaning his roles in the family, the question is, what is his task? What is he trying to accomplish? What does success look like? And spending time exploring that is something we do sometimes with families, in pretty extended workshops. We've done many of those workshops with families, just focusing on this question. And we actually encourage you all to explore with your families this question before you actually offer any answers. And if we were with you, we would actually do a little bit of that, and hear your ideas. But unfortunately, we're in this place now where we just kind of have to give you a little space to imagine. So standing back with our family hats on, whether we own a business or not, at the end of the day, what's our job? What's really important? I think it's really, it's worth asking that question. And so at the Lovins Group, we've analyzed, the results of many of these meetings, and based on all of that data, we think we have a working answer after these many sessions. And we're not claiming that our answer is complete. We're always actually seeking to improve the answer, but we think that it actually really serves us well. And it kind of acts like a North Star to guide our work, but also our own family life. And we sincerely encourage you all to discuss this topic with your own family. Because we think that when any of us does this, and whenever any of us does our job in the family arena well, we all win. And I think the opposite is true when especially in family business systems where the influence can be quite great over other people, when we don't do our job well, I think we all can suffer. So, even though this is cheating a bit, we're going to give you the answer that we've come up with. We think our working answer is quite good, that the essential task of family is to create a space of true belonging where members grow into responsible adults who can function effectively in this world, build meaningful relationships, and develop the confidence to pursue their own unique dreams. It's like this space to find out who you really are and then to begin to manifest that as you grow into responsible adulthood. So family meetings, really, if you boil this down, are really essentially about two things. The first is creating a space of true belonging. And the second is supporting growth into responsible adulthood for all family members, regardless of their age. And these are two big things. They're not easy to achieve. And I think when we look at them, these two things deeply, one of my heroes, Brene Brown, puts it like this. She says, true belonging is not passive. It's a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, to get uncomfortable, and to learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are. She said that in a really remarkable book called Braving the Wilderness, which I would encourage for anybody interested in the topic of true belonging. Some in family business systems get confused when we talk about true belonging. They think that somehow validating one's right to truly belong in the family somehow means that they have entitlement or a right to belong in positions in the business or on the board or in the family office or as an owner. And that's a confusion. Those circles are not places where you have an unconditional right to belong. It doesn't also mean that you have an obligation to take any position either. It means that, once you have a place of true belonging within the family, it's about the fullness of who you really are in the family. If we turn our attention to becoming a responsible adult and having the courage to pursue your own dreams, this is no small task either. I mean, it's no small task in any family, but in a family that has made a substantial fortune or a substantial name for itself, when one's name is on the door and much of the family identity is tied up in the family business, or when it's paid for your college education or your first apartment, it can have a very strong gravitational pull that keeps us from pursuing our deep interests. It can also keep us dependent in many ways. And as the saying goes, we're destined to age, but there's no guarantee that we're going to grow up. And we think that there's often complications to growing up in significant family businesses. Our commitment at the Lovins Group when we're working with families is that family meetings are always focused around the pursuit of the various aspects of what we call the essential task of family. So one exercise we just want to share with you about, how we go about doing that is something that we found that is a tool that we help family members use when they're kind of looking at their journey and pursuing their own dreams. This comes from the island of Okinawa in Japan, which, interestingly, has the highest concentration of centenarians in the world. Family flourishing, and actually their community flourishing, seems to happen there when all members are supporting each other to discover three things. Actually, it's the four overlapping things here. In family business systems, we sometimes focus on the top three, but the four are, what do you really love? What lights you up? What brings you joy? But simultaneously looking at what you're actually good at, where your competencies are, or where you want them to be, that you have capabilities to grow them. And then connecting those with what you think the world needs, what you uniquely think your community, your family, your organization, however you define the world, actually what it needs. And then looking at what you can be paid for. And we think this word in the middle that's called ikigai, which is their word for reason for being or purposeful living, is a very powerful way of beginning to look at how the family business system can support people on their individual journey of finding out who they are. So that's just one example. We'd actually encourage you to play with this.
Okay, so as we've seen then, as Don has described, the task of family is to raise responsible adults who can build meaningful relationships and develop the confidence to pursue their own dreams. The foundation for this task is the family as a place of belonging and authentic expression. With that as a foundation, family meeting agendas can be designed around specific aspects of the task. Here on the slide are a few examples that we pulled out from a longer list. For example, some business owning families have a hard time opening their boundaries to new spouses. There's a lot at stake, and it can be helpful to talk about how to be welcoming and inclusive, something often that isn't talked about. This is particularly true in situations where the new spouse is signing a prenuptial agreement and as a result may feel excluded to some degree by that experience. Another example, the family may want to discuss ways to support family members who choose not to work in the business, but may benefit from family resources being available to launch entrepreneurial projects. What's our policy around that? How do we pay attention to that, to those other needs? A third is in some cases, family members struggle with the effect of wealth on their lives. That's something we see quite regularly. And they can benefit from talking together about their relationship to money, to inherited wealth, and how that may cause them to feel different from or excluded by other people. Here's the longer list I was mentioning. It's not something you need to, if you can see it and you're looking at it, you don't have to look at it too deeply. Right here, we can make sure that you can get a copy of that. But as you can see, the list also includes topics such as philanthropy, generational succession, education, career development. So we can work on all of these topics from that specific perspective on how they might support the achievement of the task of family and the raising of responsible adults. As you said, Don, no matter how old we all are, we're always continuing to try to become responsible adults.
Yeah, and Keith and I just put this together. I think there's like over 20 topics for family meetings that we've done recently. And we're happy to share this with anybody. If you want to send us an email or visit our website, actually, if you click on the little, we did a little talk on family meetings that's there on our website, and it gives you a little portal to get some of our lists. That's easy to do that. But let's go to the next slide, Keith, because I think it's not, it's not enough just to say we're going to have family meetings and we're going to have these topics. How do we know if we're actually having an effective family meeting? I think that's really important because the measures are a bit different than in a board meeting or a management meeting. And, we've compiled another list that we can send you of the signs that a family meeting is actually going well. And I think there's some important things on this list, but I want to focus just really on some of the ideas that might be different than what you're thinking, because we know that when family life is the focus, emotions often run high. And we found that there are ways of knowing if a family meeting is on track or not, even when there's intensity of emotion. We think that the hallmark of an effective family meeting is not simply a meeting where there's no tension or where there's a feeling of harmony. It's great when that happens, but it's not the case that you're having a bad meeting if there happens to be intensity. We believe that the most effective meetings are when family members are speaking authentically, when they're speaking about the truth of their experience in this family's life with each other. And when this is made safe somehow for all to do, even when it's difficult. And even when it's messy, and even when people sometimes react poorly, that somehow the family has the capacity to get through and be able to listen to the expressions of the truth. In a family business system, there's often a lot at stake. And so we know that speaking authentically about family life often feels like a threat to some people. It could feel like a threat to a bonus or to a promotion or to a seat on the board or to access to trust distributions. Family members can really have a hard time expressing themselves because of how they've been treated in the past when they tried to speak up. And I think from an early age, Keith was talking about how we learn how to belong to our families. We learn also what's acceptable to talk about and what isn't. We know that some things are acceptable to our fathers that aren't acceptable to our mothers and vice versa. So our aim when we're facilitating a family meeting is to create the conditions where something real is going on, where family members are able to risk being themselves, and there's an effort being made by others to support the expression of themselves and to understand each other's contributions to the meeting in some deeper way. But don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean that you need to just sit around talking about your feelings all day. You know, several times I worked with multi-generational family teams in large family meetings on a fun learning activity. And in the one I'm thinking about, each team is given a few basic supplies, like a bunch of cardboard sheets, some duct tape, some garbage bags, and some PVC pipe. And then they're given a time limit and the task that they have to work together and build a boat that they're actually going to put one of their family members in and paddle across the pool. And so it's a bit of a competition between various teams in the family, and we break it up into, different branches of the family working together. And it's amazing to see how the family dynamics take over, how dominant family members take charge and how others, with creative ideas can shrink. And it's also fascinating to see how new forms of creativity and cooperation emerge between people when we interrupt the patterns that they're kind of unconscious of. And when we invite the quiet ones to speak up and the bossy ones to listen, some amazing new things often happen. I think it's important that, embracing the messiness of family meetings is encouraged, that people don't get too freaked out when things aren't going the way they had expected. And often when old rules are broken, then something new can happen. One time I was working with a family, and the family outcast, there was this adult woman who had pink hair and tattoos, who had spent a lot of her life in therapy. She just spoke up in the middle of this meeting and broke the rules and really made an extraordinary contribution about process. And she did that in a room full of her well-dressed corporate, rule-following type family members. But the interesting thing, I actually met with the owners the following week. I was present in that family meeting with all the big family meeting. And then the following week we had an owners meeting. And one of her uncles said, I'd written her off, but what I saw last week was exactly the kind of leadership we need. And he said, she might actually be a rising star in this next generation. Now, that family did a lot of work to be ready for not reacting to the, break with tradition expression that happened during that family meeting. When I met this family, they actually were so invested in trying to be right and proving who was to blame and who belonged and who didn't belong, that meetings often ended in tears and angry tirades. And it took a long time for those family members, and then for their rising generation, to trust that it was safe to speak up and to break the rules. But they were committed to creating the conditions where that kind of thing could happen. And they've really reaped extraordinary benefits. It's several years later now, and I know what's happening as the rising generation, matures and gets into various forms of governance. And it's really quite remarkable. But this also brings us to our next topic about what's happening when things aren't going well in a family meeting.
Right. And exploring what can go wrong. And I'm sure everyone at this session has attended meetings in family businesses where tension around sensitive issues has led to unproductive behavior. There can be personal attacks or defensiveness, bitter silence or superficial civility. The best that can be said about these behaviors is that they allow family members to avoid having to acknowledge and approach some deeper, more difficult issues. They can be kind of maybe a protective approach. Sometimes the possibility of honest and open discussion is so far gone that, like in this cartoon, only the attorneys representing family members end up talking with each other. Alan Lovins, the founder of the Lovins Group, used to say, no one starts a family business to destroy their family. Yet we see that happen too often. So what is going on? When people get anxious or feel threatened, they defend themselves and they become unable to listen. It's as if simply listening implies that they are agreeing, and listening without feeling the pressure to agree can really be difficult to do. It's one of the biggest obstacles to real communication. The interaction often descends into a dynamic called the drama triangle or the villain-victim-rescuer dynamic, which you may be familiar with. In this dynamic, a family member sees themselves as the victim of bad intentions or of unfairness, and they typically see another family member or the family itself as the villain. The victim will often attempt to pull a business advisor or another family member in as a rescuer to advocate for his or her side. But the drama triangle is a dead end. The longer you're in it, the more entrenched the perspectives get, the more the feeling of victim-villain grows, and then what's left is a battle about who's to blame. So we want to show you, we want to sort of take a little risk here a bit and show you in a brief role play, an example of what this can look like, and then talk about how maybe family members can find a way out. So I want to just take a moment to give you the situation, and then we're going to do this role play. So a father and son run a $100 million a year business. The father is still the majority owner, but he has agreed to sell the remainder of his ownership to his son within a relatively short time frame. A year ago, the father stepped down from the CEO role, and he elevated his son to that position. The son has done actually a remarkable job keeping the business solid during the pandemic and building a management team. But since he became CEO, the son and the father have been in constant conflict. And so we want to give you a flavor of their conflict and how they're communicating. I'll play the father, and Don will be the son. So this takes place in a family meeting that actually was meant to discuss the father's future outside of the business, once he sells the business and is fully out of management. And the following dialogue emerge.
Yeah, and I think it's important before we do this to say, these are real people. We're not going to tell you their names, but these are people we're working with. We didn't just make this up. This is actually the situation as we've seen them in it. Okay,
so I'm the father. I turned the management of the business over to you because it had just gotten too big for me. I'm getting older and I'm just not up to it. I know that. I knew I couldn't continue to make all the decisions, and I can't change my management style at this late date. So I really have supported your making hires in senior positions and organizing a management team, even though it's cost us a pile of money. Do you know how much the payroll has gone up? I hope you're paying attention to that. But everywhere I look, all I see is problems. The new marketing manager is going about everything the wrong way, and no one is paying attention to customers who have been with us for decades. I can't even begin to think about my own future, what we were supposed to talk about when the warehouse is such a mess. I've been going in on weekends to push everyone to do their jobs. And I'm checking every purchase order that goes out. You wouldn't believe the mistakes I'm finding. I blame you for this. You've got big ideas, but you're not willing to get your hands dirty. I told your mother this whole place is going to fall apart because you won't take my advice. No one is taking my advice anymore.
Dad, I don't know what any of this has to do with the topic that we're supposed to be talking about right now. This is just like you can't focus on anything outside of the business. But you know what? The business is doing fine. Just look at how we've been able to do so much in the whole challenge of this pandemic. Sure, it might take a little while for this management team to kind of come together, but you got to stay out of the damn way. Otherwise, I'm never going to know, whether or not they can actually do their jobs. I see that the teams get going on projects that are really important, and then you tell them to drop everything and work on some little problem that you've discovered. Well, I'm not interested in all these little problems because I'm fixing the broken processes, which, by the way, have been broken for a very long time. And, no one's listening to you because I told them that there can't be more than one boss. So just stay out of the damn way or the business actually will fail. Okay, so we're going to take a little pause here, say, that is something that, is not unfamiliar to, what happens as you begin to open up, a family meeting and try to talk about the task of family. People get anxious and, start to do those kinds of things. So what we might do, and what we did in a situation like this, is first to interrupt the habitual pattern. And to encourage our clients to try something new in the moment. Like we actually just, kind of say, okay, we've seen this movie before. And so we'll then often propose an experiments that are simple, but not easy. And the aim of these experiments is to offer a way to help people to connect in places where the tension exists rather than fighting or avoiding, which is to try to go away from places where the tension exists. We actually attempt to stop the drama triangle cycle of reactivity by engaging curiosity about the needs that are underneath the intensity of the drama. Curiosity, we think, is a really important window or portal into the truth of the situation. And it really builds trust almost immediately when people can act that way. So here's an experiment we might offer to this father and son. We could begin by trying to reduce the temperature by just taking a break. And once the pattern is interrupted, then we might remind these two about some communication strengths that we've seen before. For example, to this son, we said, remember the time when you tried to understand your dad's concern at the last board meeting and how the whole thing turned around? Your change, the one you made, actually made the world a difference, not the change your dad made. And so then we might give him some simple instructions to try something new right now. The most important thing you could do is to find curiosity to know what's true for your dad. You don't need to fix anything. There's no pressure to agree or disagree. Just let him know that you want to find out what's really going on for him. Then the next thing you might try is to remember those 4 magic words that we taught you while you're trying to listen to your dad. Then when your dad takes a breath, when he's done, let him know what you've heard about his truth, and then use those 4 magic words. Remember those? They're, did I get it? Those are magic words. So you're just going to end what you say next with, did I get it? That's it. And, if you succeed, you might just find a way to understand your dad's real need that's underneath all of his criticism.
Okay, so we're going to quickly try that role play one more time. I'm not going to start from the beginning. I'll just do a little wind up here and we'll see if we can find something else happening. So I'm the father again. I can't even think about my future when the warehouse is such a mess. I've been going in on weekends to push everyone to do their jobs. I'm checking every purchase order that goes out. And you wouldn't believe the mistakes I'm finding. I blame you for this. You've got big ideas, but you're not willing to get your hands dirty. I told your mother this whole place is going to fall apart because you won't take my advice. No one takes my advice anymore.
Okay, Dad, this is a little hard for me because I'm starting to get defensive, but I have heard you say that it's tough for you to think about moving on when, you walk in and you still feel worried about the direction of the business. You're not sure that the new managers are capable of doing their jobs, and you see things falling through the cracks, and you don't see enough attention being paid to key customers, and you're concerned about people not paying enough attention to important things like the warehouse and purchase orders and stuff like that. Did I get it?
Well, you got a lot of it, but there was more. I spent 40 years of my life building this company, and I know a few things about running a business. Every day I see problems that are costing us money, but I can't get you or anyone else to listen. And then everyone gets annoyed when I go fix them myself. I just feel like I've been shut out and I'm not respected by the employees of the business that I built from the ground up.
Okay. I think I hear you, Dad. I think what I'm hearing is that this transition is tough for you, and for it to work out, we have to do a better job and find a way that's really respectful of you and all that you've done here and all that you've contributed. Did I get it?
Yeah, okay. I think you did. I think what I really want to say is that it's really hard for me to think about transferring the ownership of this business to you while I feel so disrespected and left behind.
Okay. We need to talk more about how we're going to change that, Dad, and how to turn this around, because I can see how you need to feel respected for all that you've done in the business before we can talk about anything about your future. And I think it's hard for me to do that sometimes because I'm feeling a little like inadequate and, a little anxious about, my new role too. So, but I think we do need to find a way to respect you more.
Okay. All right. End of role play. And kind of last comments here. There is a saying, any judgment, any criticism, any accusation is just the tragic expression of a need. I think that's a really powerful statement. And it's tragic because we get further away from getting our needs met when we use those kinds of strategies: judgment, criticism, accusation. Getting curious about what's going on when you see patterns of reactivity in your own families can change everything. So using the 4 magic words, as Don said, can change your life. And the practice is simple, but not easy when you are already in that drama triangle. So we urge you to try it. And it's really one of the tools that we use to support family meetings. And I know we're really getting towards the end here. So I think I'll leave it at that. We have one more slide that talks about road-tested rules. I'm just going to comment on 2. The last 2 rules provide, I think, a good summary of all this that has been talked about. First, family meetings become ineffective when family members get trapped in unproductive dynamics. The only way to exit the drama triangle is to treat a judgment or a criticism as an unexpressed need and genuinely try to find out what that need is. And then finally, family meetings play a critical role because when they are used to create a space of belonging, they enhance all of the other parts of family business governance. And
we're happy to share you all the rest of our road-tested rules. I think there's some good stuff in there. If you've been at all kind of stimulated or motivated to conduct a family meeting, we're happy to share this list with you or to answer any questions. The next slide has our emails on there. I'm Don at lovinsgroup.com and Keith is Keith at lovinsgroup.com. Just send us an email and we're happy to interact with your questions. And Angelo, if any questions have come to mind for you, maybe we kind of all come back together here and we can have a little chat in the last few minutes that are left, or if you received any questions from the audience while we were talking.
Yes. First of all, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I took some notes and learned a lot. You beat me to the punch with leaving the screen up with your emails, but I'm still going to recommend, especially for the live audience, sometimes it's easier for them just to click on it. If you don't mind, if you could each type in your applicable email in the chat feature of Zoom so the live attendees could see it. I'll also give you a chance in a couple of minutes for those that will listen only to this to repeat the contact info. And yes, if you could probably stop the screen share and return back to the traditional visual. There you go. All good. So first of all, that was fantastic. I'm going to move some people that were in the attendee position to the panelists so they could be a little bit more interactive with the group and ask chat feature questions. So we are going to have a little bit longer than after 3 o'clock. So if you do have questions, we encourage you to utilize it in the chat feature of Zoom. While some of you may be formulating those questions, that was a wonderful PowerPoint and presentation. And I know you're kind enough for those that directly email you to have a chance to share it with them. So again, we encourage, especially our live participants, and I did get both the chat feature and 1 or 2 emails, so that helps to answer that. The last role play that you did with the father and son in the business perspective, I was chuckling a little bit internally. I would have felt more in line with the son perhaps 10 or 15 years ago. But now that I'm older and I'm more established in what I do, I probably felt myself a little bit more aligning with the father. So it's interesting how our perspectives change when the facts change around it, as 10, 15, 20 years could impact, as well as our age and where we are, what our goals are, if we're transitioning from the business, then what's going to replace the business when it felt like a second family 24/7? And now we're our late 50s, our 60s, maybe our 70s. And the old adage that we believe in is you now lose your sense of purpose. You lose your direction. Okay, you might have money, but then what? You pass away from a heart attack, or you're lonely, you get depressed, which is something that is not spoken about as much with older people, which definitely happens. I'm throwing a lot at you there, but that transition from business to being a father, a grandfather, but not being the one who controls the business anymore. I could already tell that's not going to be easy for me.
Yeah, and I think what was so important about that role play is that the dad has those feelings, and he truly has those feelings, but you have to allow yourself to be very vulnerable to start talking about them. And even though they set up this family meeting to do that, instead, what's he going to do? He comes in and expresses his anxiety with all the deficits he sees around him, and he stays focused on that business. And if the son is unable to listen, if he's unable to just step back and listen to his dad in a way that allows his dad to get past those initial frustrations, he's never going to be able to engage him on the real issue that you're talking about, which is this is an incredibly difficult life stage transition that, I'm trying to convince myself to go through, but that it's really hard to enter. And that's what's so important about that. Yeah.
What I would add to that is that when you look at the task of family that we described, creating a space of true belonging where people can grow into responsible adults who can do these things. One of the interesting parts about that is the age doesn't matter. And sometimes actually older people in the family begin to look less like responsible adults and start to actually behave strongly like their children are supposed to take care of them. So it's like, this is hard to do this thing where I'm going to, transition from my role as, the guy out there hitting home runs to being the guy who's kind of managing the team and sitting on the bench. Well, our response often is that, adults can do difficult things. Let's actually look at how you would actually admire and respect someone who's in this transition, and how are you going to behave in a way that you would actually admire and respect as a responsible adult as you're going through this difficult transition, and actually help them to kind of see that in some ways it's a heroic transition to move to the place where you're beginning to see the competencies in the rising generation and validate those. And sometimes I think the older people actually find great satisfaction in it. So, that diagram where we said, what do you love? What are you good at? What do you think the world needs, is one that we often have to use with older adults also, because they've gotten to the place where they can't even think about what they love and what they're good at. And sometimes that's a really important exercise, not just for people finding their first career, but for those who are kind of going into their next transition. And finding things that people love outside of the business can be done. It's just sometimes people are too anxious to look there. So they need a kind of support to do it.
Yes, that makes tremendous sense. And kind of finding purpose after work or business is probably worthy of another Zoom and podcast at a point in the future. Yep. I'll ask effectively one more question, and we'll see if any chat feature questions, which we encourage, come in. It's going to be along the lines of what I asked, because it's something that I'm living through to an extent. So to give you some context, I have a 17-year-old boy. His name is Dylan. He's a senior. So we're actually in the process of college applications, visiting colleges. We have another visit this Friday. And the whole concept of when they're younger, you're like a superhero. And then as they start to get older, they become more independent. And that's good in many ways, but then they completely close off the parent. And apparently, the father or mom, in my case, the dad, goes from being brilliant to being stupid. And then hopefully one day I'll be discovered as being brilliant again. Even if it's not true, at least in my mind, I find it harder to find time to talk about imparting my experiences and providing guidance. And sometimes I try to do it in the car, but of course they have headphones on, or during dinner, but somehow it doesn't feel right. It seems forced. How do you find the time, given the time in the home is limited to just a couple of more months? And then, like you said, they find different family units through school and friendships and peers being away from home. And I know the growth of being away from home supposed to be one of the true values of college. It's education, it's independence, and effectively taking responsibility, making your own food, your bed, forming relationships, social interactions with others. So to me, college is much more than simply education that's been more impacted by COVID. But where do I find time to talk without it feeling rushed in a car ride that's 10 minutes or a little artificial over dinner? What's the one common bond that we do have that sometimes I weave life stories into? It happens to be sports.
Well, I mean, you've just said a whole lot, Angelo, and it's interesting. You know, I have a 17-year-old son also who's a senior and is in this same stage. And Keith, actually, his youngest has just made the transition to college. And so we all can relate to this. I think that your desire to continue in the space of imparting your knowledge actually is part of the challenge here. Because in a way, in order for your son to leave you, he has to break that experience of dependency. It feels really good to us as parents to impart our knowledge, to give to our children. It feels like a warm connection. I think we have to remember the task of family, which is that our children have to become responsible adults. They, in some ways, need more for us to see them and validate what they know and their brilliance rather than them validating ours. So we can actually turn the equation around a little bit and see that our most important job is to support their growth and development into leaving us, which is incredibly painful. And I would say, as I'm going through this, and knowing what I know about family therapy, I think my biggest gift to my son in this stage is that he knows I'm going to take care of his mother and her broken heart as he leaves. And so the time actually is more about, when we're in the car, for me to hear about him and what's going on in his life, not for me to tell him anymore. And for him to witness that I've got this. You're going to be able to leave, and I'm going to be able to take care of what's happening here at home.
Yeah, and I think maybe the one thing I would add is that it is just really important to make, just to be around and to stay around. I have a 19-year-old son and actually a 30-year-old son, and both of them, I think, having gone through the same thing you're talking about, call me. Even my 30-year-old son, he calls, he says, he'll say, I got something for you, and he actually starts to seek advice or seek a dialogue when he's in a kind of a difficult circumstance. And it's funny because my younger son, actually in the pandemic, he became the the keeper of a sourdough, whatever they call it, sourdough starter. So he calls, and my wife and I talked to him about, keeping track of the sourdough and making pizza dough and making bread. And it was a letting go. And because, we're still there, they come back. And I think I really want to support, Don, what you're saying, that you let that space happen and you stay around. You don't feel personally somehow hurt by that. And then they come back.
And I have one more thing to add in the family business arena, because my own personal experience.
Right.
I came back from college and graduated at the top of my class, felt like I could do anything. And then I got into business with my parents. And my dad needed to impart his wisdom. I didn't know much about business. He knew a lot about business. And it was fascinating. Almost every interaction ended up with me feeling small and him feeling big. As I was trying to run this company, he needed to come in there and fill me up. Well, what happened is I kept shrinking and shrinking, and my confidence kept reducing and reducing to the point where, it felt like it was crushing me. And so I think that's just a really important orientation, that we have to balance the seeing of our children's own brilliance and letting it, bloom, and sometimes asking a poignant question out of our wisdom to make them think about something in a new way.
Wow. No, that's tremendous advice. And I didn't have to pay for a retainer or hourly.
Hopefully it'll be valuable for others who are listening as well. Let's see if anybody else.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, those are going to be common things. And some of this popped in my head when you were doing the role play, which again, I could kind of relate to both sides, but as I've gotten older, maybe a little bit more to dad's side there. And on that note, for those that are watching, listening live, whatever it may be, yes, I know that most of our audience now has your emails, which is great. But for those that may be listening in, we're going to encourage you to repeat that. But if you could mention the company name, the website, potentially how they could interact, and again, repeat the email.
Sure. So, actually, the company was founded by Dr. Alan Lovins years ago. I actually joined Alan as his successor, and we formed a business partnership, and then we did a management succession where I took over the management of the business, and then I bought him out and became the owner of the business. Keith actually joined me after that. And so we felt it was really important to honor Alan's founding of the business. And so we keep the name, the Lovins Group. So it's LOV as in Victor, IN as in Nancy S, lovinsgroup.com. And we have lots of, free information on the website. You can, go there and request the list that we talked about here. And also our emails are pretty simple. I'm Don at Lovins Group and Keith is Keith at Lovins Group. We'd be delighted to share more with you if you have follow-up questions about what we've talked about today.
Yep. Yes, that's great. And actually, you just read it off because we just got a text in, and Paul, talking to you, they're more than happy to share the slides. You'll see their emails via chat if you didn't just hear it, and feel free to have a chance to reach out, introduce yourself, and request as such. And actually, on that note, gentlemen, sometimes it is a little tricky in slide presentations as we recreate it via a YouTube video. Do send me the presentation as well, because my techie's probably going to have to match up certain things with what he sees with the actual PowerPoint. So it's a little bit extra editing work. So just a heads up to send it to me, which I can benefit from also viewing it and understanding it more in my own context. Well, this was, really a tremendous amount of both fun and very educational. And again, there's certain things we didn't have as much of a chance to get into, the dynamic of not face-to-face, but virtual, both the advantages to that. And there are some advantages. Definitely. Sometimes what I hear from family members, especially if they're younger and working in their career, is they just can't, or maybe don't want to, take days off during a certain time of the year, where now potentially with Zoom and online, there's more flexibility because of the efficiencies. So there's always good to leave some things on the table. There's many things we could discuss. These are always complex and highly personal topics, and 1 hour or an hour and 10 minutes is not going to answer everything, but it's a wonderful start. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast, and I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of wealth and their family offices and selectively key advisors. We do a significant amount of original proprietary content, which I include as my interviews and videos that you're noting here, but books, research, white papers, videos, social media, podcasting, a lot. We normally love to host programming, but a little on hold because of COVID. But as many of you heard me say many times, in many ways, I've never been busier. We're doing hundreds of programs now, not just 10. They're just digital, but they're actually deeper dives into singular topics. If this was Don and Keith at a traditional event, they would probably either get a block of 30 to 45 minutes. We had more time here. So in many ways, they're actually deeper, more intellectual dives, and our members have access to them because they're all recorded. Some of it we make available to the public in podcasting or YouTube, but 100% of it effectively is available, with rare exceptions for those that don't want to record the interview. That's happened a couple of times to our members. There's many other resources, my Rolodex, my experiences, connectivity to peers, which is the value of membership. So we're very active even during COVID. Our website, which was updated a couple of weeks back, it's a pretty extensive redo, is familyofficeassociation.com. My direct email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. I'm very active on social media. Probably the one that we're promoting the heaviest is my YouTube channel. Simply, that's Family Office. Go and subscribe. And there's a fair amount of videos and content that are on there that are very valuable, I hope, to the community. On that note, gentlemen, Keith, and certainly Don, great to see you again. Enjoyed it greatly. Look forward to the next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you.
Appreciated being here.
Thank you.